Well, as we've been discussing, the heart of this impeachment inquiry is the allegation that President Trump suspended military aid to Ukraine as a means of extracting dirt on one of his 2020 political rivals. In June, the president decided to put nearly $400 million in U.S. support for Ukraine, put it on hold. Support that Ukraine, a U.S. ally, desperately needed in their battle with Russia and for other needs. It still needs. We wanted to get away from the political turmoil gripping Washington and see exactly what the fight between Ukraine and Russia looks like right now. We asked Clarissa Ward to go to the front lines in Ukraine. Here's what she found.
On the front line of Ukraine's war with Russia, conditions are basic and the enemy is near. This position just 600 yards from Russian-backed separatists. Soldiers stand guard in dirt trenches, reminiscent of the First World War. Commander Pavel Sergeyevich tells us one of his men was shot dead by a sniper 10 days ago. He says Ukraine needs all the help it can get.
So he's saying that when he heard the news that President Trump had frozen the military aid, he was unhappy because he says America is our most important, our strongest ally.
That aid was released in September, but the temporary freeze left a chill. The nearest village, Shirokino, used to be a popular seaside resort. Now there are no people left, just devastation. Even the church was hit. In war, nothing is sacred.
After 5 long years, the world's attention has basically moved on from Ukraine. But the war here is not over yet, and Ukraine is still very much dependent on the support of the U.S.
Ukrainian Marine Alexander shows us what is left of the local school. It was destroyed by Russian artillery at the start of the war. It will be 10 years before people can come back, he says. All this territory needs to be demined. But that process can't even begin until the fighting stops.
Our guide has asked us now to put on our helmets because apparently the separatists have actually been using drones to drop ordnance on some of the soldiers here.
Alexander says it's time to move on, concerned we may have been spotted. We push further north to the mining town of Terezk. Once under the control of Russian-backed separatists, it was taken back by the Ukrainian army in a bitter battle in July 2014.
You can now see the flames shooting out of the top of the building.
Teresa Fillman watched it all from her home. The Florida native runs a Christian charity called His Kids Too and has lived here for many years.
I mean, we were shelled for days on end. And, you know, I would go to sleep and I'd literally just lay there and just say, God, protect me.
During the worst of the fighting, she would bring home-cooked meals to Ukrainian troops on the front lines.
So when you start knowing those people and putting a name and a face together, I mean, I have friends that were killed. I'm not going to minimize this.
Were you aware of the fact that the White House had temporarily frozen military aid to Ukraine? And what was your reaction?
Probably frustration, because as far as I'm concerned, we're in a David and Goliath situation. That we're outmanned and outgunned.
That hasn't slowed Fillman down. For days are a blur of activity, distributing food to the needy and displaced. Across this country, more than 1 million people have been forced from their homes. Like pensioner Yelena Salayeva. She was hit by shrapnel while picking tomatoes in her garden. She fled and has been living in this care home ever since. What can I do? I can never go back, she says. It's 5 years since we left. Like so many here, Yelena no longer cares who wins this war.
So you just want peace, you just want an end to the war.
Ukraine's president is trying to make that happen, but peace is best negotiated from a position of strength, and having the U.S. as an ally is key. In the west of the country, far from the front lines, Ukrainian forces carry out military exercises under the watchful eye of their American trainer.
They'll be engaging targets and shooting.
Captain Matthew Chapman has been working with this unit for 2 months.
Can I ask what your reaction was when you heard that military aid had been frozen to Ukraine?
Personally, I don't pay attention to U.S. domestic foreign policy or politics while I'm here. We are solely focused on the mission at hand.
And it didn't create an awkward atmosphere at all with your Ukrainian fellow soldiers?
It has not even come up in conversation with our OCs.
His Ukrainian counterpart agrees.
You know, I don't like to speak about politics. My mission and my main role is to protect my land, my country. That's all I want, and it's all I know for myself.
Do you believe that America is an ally Ukraine can rely
Completely
upon?
yes, completely yes.
Privately, some Ukrainian soldiers admit to feeling uneasy. They fear that the White House's fickle behavior may strengthen Russia's position. But all agree that with or without America's help, they have no choice but to continue this fight.
Clarissa Ward joins us now from Kiev. It's incredible, Clarissa, just how reminiscent of World War I in terms of trench warfare this is. We saw you ask the one Ukrainian soldier whether he saw America as a steadfast ally. Did you get a sense that most Ukrainians agree?
You know, Anderson, this is an interesting question. I think most Ukrainians are hopeful that the U.S. is a steadfast ally, but there's no question that they are watching very closely what's going on in the world, and they're feeling increasingly uncomfortable. That soldier who I was standing in the trenches with, I should say Marine, actually, Pavel Sergeyevich, we actually had a conversation about what's been happening in Syria and the U.S. essentially abandoning their Kurdish allies there on the ground. And he did express some discomfort with that. I think a lot of people also feel a certain degree of resignation, though, that, listen, whether or not the U.S. does decide that it's going to go the full course with us or not, we are probably going to have to accept that we might have to fight this war alone. Now, what they did say, though, is that their main fear is that that would have a ripple effect. If the U.S. is not going to be the strong ally that it has up until now been to Ukraine, that other allies that are crucial to Ukraine might also get spooked too, Anderson.
President Trump has basically said to the Ukrainian president, you and Putin should just work this out. Can Ukraine win this war without U.S. support?
I think realistically, having now traveled the length and breadth of this country, Anderson, I think it's very hard for Ukraine to win the war without U.S. support, but I also think it's really hard for Ukraine to win the peace without U.S. support. And that is what President Zelensky is trying to do right now. He wants to begin this sort of phased withdrawal peace plan that would ultimately result in having elections in some of these contested areas. But in order to do that, he needs to have leverage at the negotiating table, and he needs to have strong allies, and he needs to have, in his mind, the U.S. really fighting his corner, pushing Russia. And so far, we haven't really seen that happen. We have seen so far President Trump taking a slightly more hands-off, laissez-faire attitude to this, really encouraging President Zelensky to work this out on his own with President Putin at the negotiating table. But as you heard from that American charity worker, most Ukrainians really see this as a David and Goliath battle, and they are not convinced that they can do it without the help of their stronger allies, Anderson.